The case which you're about to see is a fictional one, but the procedure, however, is legally accurate. The characters are played by actors, but the jury is selected from members of the public.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Detective Inspector Raymond Wilkins, West Central Division, Fulchester.
Inspector.
My Lord, may I refer to my notebook from time to time? All notes were made at the time of my inquiries.
Inspector, I'd like to come directly to the evening of the 8th of June. Now, did you receive a telephone call from the previous witness, Dr. Chapman?
Yes, I did. He telephoned me shortly before 11:30 p.m. As a result of what he told me, I went immediately to Fulchester General Hospital.
And did you, while at the hospital, interview the father of the accused, Mr. James Selsey?
I did.
Now, we've heard from Dr. Chapman that Mr. Selsey was admitted to Fulchester General Hospital with 3 stab wounds. Did you interview him about these wounds?
I did. I talked to him for nearly 45 minutes. He was extremely reluctant to make a formal statement, but eventually agreed.
My lord, that statement has been produced. Exhibit 5.
Yes. Do you intend calling this James Selsey as a witness?
Yes, my lord, I do.
Very well, proceed.
You were telling the court that Mr. Selsey was extremely reluctant to make a formal statement.
Yes, kept saying he didn't want the police involved.
Well, did he explain why he didn't want the police
My
involved?
lord, in view of the fact that Mr. Selsey is not on trial and that my learned friend has indicated that he intends to call him as a witness, I submit that this line of questioning should be directed at Mr. Selsey and not at the detective inspector.
Yes, I'm inclined to agree, Mr. Hurst.
I'm obliged to your lordship. Having eventually obtained a statement from Mr. Selsey, what was your next course of action?
I went to his home, number 14 Ridge Avenue, Fulchester, and interviewed the entire family.
Well, as my lord and the jury have not had the privilege of meeting the Selsey family, perhaps you'd tell the court to whom you spoke.
His wife and 2 daughters.
And were they cooperative?
No, sir, they were extremely uncooperative. Subsequently, all 3 accompanied me to Fulchester West Central and eventually made formal statements. I then cautioned Jane Selsey.
The accused?
Yes, I cautioned her and told her that she would be charged with wounding James Selsey, her father, with intent to cause bodily harm. She replied, "Why don't you leave us alone? This is a family matter." She was then formally cautioned and charged, and she remained silent after being charged.
Thank you, Inspector. No further questions.
Detective Inspector Wilkins, you were advised that Mr. Selsey had been stabbed by Dr. Chapman.
No, sir. Dr. Chapman didn't stab him. His daughter did.
That's what I meant.
It's not what you said, Mr. Hurst.
Perhaps I should try again, my lord.
Perhaps you should.
Inspector, the first information that you obtained that Mr. Selsey had been attacked came from Dr. Chapman.
Yes, sir.
I'd like you to describe the manner of the various members of the Selsey family that evening when you interviewed them. Mr. Selsey, for instance.
Well, he was clearly in a great deal of pain and agitated.
Did he inquire about other members of his family?
Yes, he did. He wanted to know if they were all right. He was concerned about them, particularly Jane Selsey. He wanted me to reassure her that he was fine and that there was nothing to worry about.
Hardly the reaction of an enraged parent.
Mr. Hurst, I'd be obliged if you'd refrain from making comments to the jury. The officer's here to give factual evidence, not to speculate.
My lord. Inspector, what was the manner of Mrs. Selsey on that evening?
Efficient.
It's an odd word. Can you elaborate?
Well, she had everything under control by the time I arrived at the house. The blood in the kitchen had been cleaned away. The knife used to attack Mr. Selsey had been cleaned and put back in the knife drawer.
Yes, she had in fact organised everything.
She had in fact seriously inhibited police investigation.
She was not aware of that, of course.
I don't know if she was aware of the implications before I arrived. I certainly made her aware of them when I questioned her.
I put it to you that she was surprised and distressed when you and your men appeared at her front door.
Not initially. She became distressed when she realised that there was every likelihood of her youngest daughter being charged, and that was later at the police station.
Yes, now the eldest daughter, Paula, what was her demeanour at this time?
Calm, sensible. She appeared more aware of the implications than any of the others.
And my client, Jane Selsey?
Hysterical, very emotional, and very defiant.
Hysterical. Understandable, surely, a mere 2 hours after she had accidentally stabbed her father. No further questions, Inspector?
Inspector, these accidental stabbings that my learned friend refers to, There were 3 accidental stab wounds, were there not?
I believe so, sir.
Yes, and you also described the accused at the time as being very defiant. Now, in what way?
Well, she told me that she did not care a damn what happened to her, that I could not frighten her. She was sorry for what she had done, but that I could rot in hell before she would help me drag her family's name before the public.
Yes, and did you take possession of the knife that the mother and both daughters identified as the one used in the assault?
Yes, it has already been produced.
Yes, could the witness be shown Exhibit 7, please?
Yes, that is a knife.
And the nightdress the accused was wearing, Exhibit 8?
Yes, that is the nightdress. Mrs. Selsey was about to wash it when we arrived at the house.
I see. Preferring to wash her dirty linen in private, eh?
Really, my lord?
I withdraw that remark, my lord. No further questions.
And no further comments to the jury, Mr. Griffiths, from either side.
My lord. My lord, do you have any further questions for this witness?
Yes, I do. But Mr. Griffiths, tell me, do you intend calling the mother and the elder daughter?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Inspector, what time did you see Mr. Selsey at Fulchester Hospital?
At 11:45 p.m.
And what time did you visit the Selsey home?
Just before 1:30 in the morning.
And all 3 women, the mother and 2 daughters, were at home?
Yes, they were.
Had any of them been to Fulchester Hospital?
No, my lord. They had summoned an ambulance at 11:14 p.m. Apparently they were waiting at home for news from the hospital.
Waiting at home?
Yes, my lord.
Right, thank you, Inspector. You may go.
I call Mr. James Selsey. How long have you worked in local government, Mr. Selsey?
Just over 17 years.
And on the night of the 8th of June, you were involved in an argument with your youngest daughter, Jane. Now, would you tell my lord and the jury the circumstances leading up to that argument?
I'll try. It's not easy to discuss one's family in the present situation.
No, I do realise that.
Mr. Selsey, I've no objection if you prefer to sit while giving your evidence.
Oh, that's most kind of you, my lord, but I am fully recovered from the accident. Though I would appreciate a glass of water.
Give him a glass of water.
In your own time, Mr. Selsey.
I suppose we're an old-fashioned family by today's standards. We're churchgoers. We don't go every Sunday, but we go fairly regularly. My wife and I have tried to instill in our daughters the same values and moralities that we ourselves respect. We're not liberal or trendy. As our daughters grew up, we tried to ensure that they read good literature, listened to good music, that sort of thing. That isn't to say that they couldn't read other books or listen to pop. We merely wished to keep a measure of control over them, give them some standards. Respect for teachers. Respect for law and order. We're a loving, caring family. I didn't wish this prosecution. It's not needed. It's so unnecessary.
Mr. Selsey, I do realise how upsetting this whole experience must have been for you. You mentioned a moment or two ago that your family had great respect for law and order. Well, it is in fact that law and order that brings your daughter into the courtroom. Now, please, continue.
Continue. Law and order. In my worst nightmares, I never dreamt that I'd be standing in a witness box giving evidence against my own daughter. What shall I tell you? During the month or so prior to the accident, Jane had been coming home rather late. The odd half hour here, the odd hour there. Probably most parents wouldn't have worried. Most parents wouldn't have made a fuss. Perhaps we're over-anxious. But we did worry. I'm not blind or a fool. Drugs, drink, and sex are the toys that many of this modern generation play with. Previously, Jane had always brought her friends home to meet us so that we could get to know them. Whoever she was seeing during this period never called for her, never telephoned. He or they were people kept from us, so we had no way to evaluate them. On the night of the accident, Jane was over 2 hours late, and we were beside ourselves with worry. My eldest daughter, Paula, who was visiting us at the time, offered to go out and look for her, but we decided to sit and wait a while. Eventually, she came in. She told us that she'd been sitting in a coffee bar and had just forgotten all about the time. As so often happens with parents, our fears and worries turn to relief, and then to anger. I was particularly upset that she'd caused her mother so much distress. I spoke to her harshly, perhaps too harshly. She stormed into the kitchen to get herself a cup of tea or a sandwich, I think, and I was angry that she'd left the sitting room whilst we were still talking. I followed her into the kitchen. She was as distressed as I was, I suppose. She began frantically waving a knife about, and I tried to grab it from her, and next thing I was on the floor, covered in blood.
Now, prior to this moment, had you threatened her?
In what way?
Well, physically, had you hit her?
Certainly not. No, I've always believed to resort to violence in the middle of an argument was to admit defeat.
When was, in fact, the first time you ever did hit your daughter?
Apart from a symbolic slap or two when they were very, very young, we have never hit our children.
So on this particular evening, she would have no reason to be in fear of you.
Fear? I love my children.
And is that love reciprocated?
Yes, it is.
Could I be shown Exhibit 7, please? Yet, on the 8th of June, this loving daughter of yours stabbed you with this knife.
I've already told you that that was an accident.
Indeed you have, Mr. Selsey, and I've noted every time you refer to the stabbing, you refer to it as an accident. 3 positive, deliberate wounds, all accidents?
Yes.
And Dr. Chapman testified that had one of these wounds been an inch either way, you would have died. Doubtless an accidental death.
Yes, of course. You don't seriously believe that my daughter would have deliberately injured me, do you?
That, Mr. Selsey, is a question for the jury to determine. Now tell me, how was she dressed?
In her nightdress.
Well, how was that?
I beg your pardon?
Well, you've just told this court of the confrontation, this family conference when Jane eventually arrived home late. She'd been to some coffee bar in a nightdress?
No, of course not. No, she came in the back way and went upstairs and got dressed ready for bed, and then she came downstairs to get herself a snack. That was the first time that we knew that she'd actually come home.
Are you shielding your daughter, Mr. Selsey? That attack she made on you was quite deliberate. Out of anger, frustration, pique, call it what you will, she resented your criticism of her thoughtlessness. She objected to your questions, rebelled against your parental discipline, and deliberately stabbed you 3 times.
If you knew my daughter Jane as well as I do, you'd know that that was utter nonsense. What's happened to privacy in this country? An Englishman's home is his castle. This was a private argument. A family argument. If that damned doctor had just stitched me up and kept his nose out of my business, all this would have been long forgotten. Do you realize the damage that you're doing by this prosecution?
Mr. Selsey, Mr. Griffiths is doing his duty as a Crown prosecutor.
And I'm attempting to do mine as a parent, my lord. Those stab wounds healed long ago. The damage that is being done in this courtroom to my entire family may never heal.
I believe I've shown great tolerance to you, evidently far too much. This court is not concerned with the implications that may result for your family as a consequence of this trial. Now, you've talked rather grandly about respecting law and order. Clearly, if you'd not been stabbed 3 times, this trial would not now be taking place. But these same laws that you value so highly govern your family just as much as they do the rest of us.
I'm sorry, my lord. I just can't see how any of this is going to do any good.
Evidently. Mr. Griffiths.
I'm obliged, my lord, but I have no further questions.
I won't delay you long, Mr. Selsey. My learned friend has covered most adequately virtually all of my questions. Now, we've learned that neither you nor your wife ever resorted to physical violence on your children.
That is correct.
Now, prior to the night you were stabbed, had Jane ever been violent toward you?
No. My daughter, both my daughters, are gentle, caring and loving. She'd never been violent or threatened violence.
And there's another matter you may be able to help my lord and the jury upon. Now, we've heard testimony that after you went to Fulchester Hospital in the ambulance, your family remained at home. None accompanied you. None came, prior to the questioning by the police, to see you. Now, can you throw any light on that?
No, that was my idea. My daughter was clearly upset and distraught, and I asked her sister and her mother to stay with her and comfort her. I would have driven myself to the hospital, only I was rather weak from loss of blood. That was why my wife called the ambulance.
But your prime concern was that your daughter Jane should be comforted.
Yes. She was dreadfully upset after the accident.
Thank you very much, Mr. Selsey. I have no further questions, my lord.
My lord, I call Mrs. Mary Selsey.
There were similar teething troubles when our eldest daughter, Paula, was going through her adolescence. They were happily resolved.
Now, by happily resolved, you mean when Paula went off to university and ceased living at home?
That certainly helped. Coping for herself at Cambridge gave her an insight into the realities of life.
And at the time she left home, what age would she be, Mrs. Selsey?
18.
Some 5 years ago.
Yes.
She's lived away from home for the last 5 years.
Yes. But she visits us frequently.
Indeed, but for the last 5 years, your prime concern has been for your youngest daughter, Jane.
I wouldn't call it my prime concern. I have many interests. I'm not obsessive about Jane's welfare.
Mrs. Selsey, I am anxious that my lord and the jury get an accurate picture of your domestic life.
I can't see why. It seems highly irrelevant.
Mrs. Selsey, I'm the sole judge in the court of what is and is not relevant. Please answer the question.
I object to this public inquiry into my family. I find the ordeal that we're all being subjected to quite disgusting.
I understand, and I can even sympathise with your objections. But we're all gathered here to ascertain exactly what happened in your home on a particular night. Now, do you understand that?
Yes, my lord.
Now, in order to do that, learned counsel clearly feels that we should know something of your way of life. And I direct you to answer that question. Mrs. Selsey, counsel has told you that he is keen to establish an accurate picture of your domestic life, particularly on that night. Now, give him one.
I breed dogs. I'm interested in gardening. I'm a member of the WRVS. I have coffee mornings to raise funds for Oxfam. I also read the Daily Telegraph, if that's of any help.
My lord, I request permission to treat this witness as hostile.
My lord, it's surely an extraordinary situation when my learned friend requests permission to treat his own witness as hostile. I feel I must object.
I shall grant his request. I will not have witnesses in this or any other trial coming into the box under the delusion that they can behave and talk as they wish and mislead the jury. Now, parental loyalty is one thing, but contempt for the law is something else.
Will you hear me further on this, my lord?
Certainly.
Clearly, both parents are distressed at the situation they find themselves in. It's no easy matter to give evidence against your own daughter.
But if I had not been fully aware of those aspects, I wouldn't have allowed either of them such full rein. But there comes a point, Mr. Hurst, when justice is in danger of being subverted. And I think we've reached that point in this trial. Now, let's get on with it.
I am obliged, my lord. Mrs. Selsey, after your husband was stabbed by your daughter, why did you not call the police?
It wasn't a matter that concerned the police.
Oh, come on now. Your husband is stabbed not once but 3 times by your youngest daughter, and you say this is not a matter for the police?
Yes, I do. It was an accident. She didn't mean to hurt James, not for a moment.
Mrs. Selsey, a person doesn't stab somebody in the chest accidentally. Plunge the knife in, withdraw it, plunge it in again, withdraw it, plunge it yet again, and withdraw it. I mean, we've heard a lot in this courtroom about what a loving, caring family you all are. Are these the actions I've just described of a loving daughter towards her father?
I was there. You were not. She didn't intend to hurt him. They were the actions of an overexcited, distraught teenager.
But what about your own actions after the attack? Were they the actions of a distraught, overexcited person?
What do you mean?
Or did you not clean the kitchen up? Wipe the knife clean, this knife, put it back in the drawer, then sit down quite calmly as if nothing had happened?
I did what seemed best at the time. I didn't know the police were going to be called in.
Why all this concern because your daughter was late?
We're that kind of parents. We care.
An hour here, half an hour there. Surely such slight unpunctuality didn't merit your reaction. It is not uncommon for teenagers to come home late, is it?
It is in my house.
What did you think she was doing? What did you think she was up to?
What do you mean?
Well, did you think she was sleeping with boys?
That's a disgusting suggestion.
Had your husband accused her of sleeping with boys? Or being on the pill?
I will not answer such an obscene question.
Mrs. Selsey, I direct you to answer the question.
You can direct as much as you like. I'm not going to stand here and be insulted and humiliated by that man.
Mrs. Selsey, I consider that question relevant. To your knowledge, did your husband accuse your daughter of being on the pill?
I told you I will not be a party to such an obscene dialogue. We are a Christian family. A good family.
Members of the jury, there are certain matters which I wish to discuss with counsel, so I must ask you to retire to your room for a short time. Now, Mrs. Selsey, I must warn you that continued refusal to answer counsel's questions might place you in contempt of court.
I don't care. I am not going to answer that kind of question, and there's nothing that you can do to make me.
Unfortunately for you, there is. Now, clearly you are in contempt of court, and unless you agree to answer Mr. Griffith's questions, I will rule that you will go to prison, and you will remain there until you purge your contempt. And that will only be done when you accept that I am the sole judge of what questions shall and shall not be answered by you.
Contempt. I intend to treat those kind of questions with the contempt they deserve.
Very well. Mr. Hurst, Mr. Griffiths, the witness will be held in a secure establishment overnight and remain there until she purges her contempt. We will adjourn for the day.
All stand.
The case of the Queen against Selsey will be resumed tomorrow in the Crown Court. The case you're about to see is a fictional one. The procedure, however, is legally accurate. The characters are played by actors, but the jury is selected from members of the public. Jane Selsey is accused of stabbing her father 3 times in the course of a family quarrel. Yesterday, her mother, Mrs. Selsey, was remanded in custody for contempt of court.
Consequently, I'm advised that despite a night in Fulchester Prison, Mrs. Selsey is continuing her refusal to answer the questions put to her late yesterday afternoon.
My Lord, in view of the new instructions I've received this morning, I feel if the trial is to proceed, my next witness may render the answers I was seeking from Mrs. Selsey redundant.
Who is this witness?
The eldest daughter, my Lord, Paula Selsey. If I might suggest we proceed without the assistance of the mother, and that I may consider it at the end of the case with the prosecution.
Yes, have you any objections, Mr. Hurst, to this course of action?
No, my lord. If, of course, Mrs. Selsey is at some stage recalled to the witness box, I reserve my right of cross-examination.
Oh, yes, of course. Well, very well. Let us have the jury back in, and we'll continue then.
Miss Selsey, I understand you've made a further statement.
Yes, that's right.
Now, doubtless you are aware that your mother is at present in prison for refusing certain questions yesterday afternoon.
I'm very aware. That's why I changed my statement.
Well, let us make a beginning at the point at which your mother refused to answer yesterday. To your knowledge, does your sister use any form of contraception?
Yes, she does. She's on the pill.
Paula, you promised you wouldn't say anything.
Young lady, I will brook no further interference with this trial.
Sorry, my lord.
Very well. You'll have ample opportunity when you're called by your counsel to give evidence. Until that time, if you've anything to say, you say it to your solicitor.
Do you know how long she's been using oral contraception?
My lord, really? I mean, how can this witness know the answer to that question? At best, her answer must be hearsay.
Not at all, Mr. Hurst. I don't know what answer the witness intends giving. She may allege that your client told her or that she was present on such and such a date. Anyway, in the fullness of time, you'll have the opportunity of cross-examining. Subsequently, you'll have the opportunity of putting your client in the witness box to deny, correct, or contradict anything this witness says. Continue, Mr. Griffiths.
Thank you, my lord. Miss Selsey, I was asking you if you knew how long your younger sister has been using oral contraception.
Since she was 12 years of age, certainly before her 13th birthday.
But surely at such a tender age, your family doctor would not have given her a prescription for contraceptives.
He didn't have to. She got the pills from Mother.
From your mother?
That's right.
Are you absolutely sure about this?
I'm quite sure.
Well, is this something your mother or sister told you?
No, I was present when Mother gave them to her for the first time.
But why would your mother put a girl not 13 years of age on the pill?
I would have thought that was obvious. Her puberty had begun.
Yes, but surely your mother didn't seriously think there was a risk that one so young would indulge in sexual relations.
She didn't think it was a risk. She knew it was a certainty.
That's an absolutely astonishing thing to say. I must remind you, young lady, you are under oath.
I'm fully aware of that fact. I'm the first member of my family you've had in the witness box who's prepared to tell the truth.
You're saying both your parents have lied in the witness box?
Yes. The entire family agreed to come into this court and tell a pack of lies.
Then why have you now decided to tell the truth?
Why? Oh, lots of reasons, really, but mainly because my mother is now in a prison cell because she refused to tell the truth. I know Mum well enough. She'd rather rot in there than tell you the truth about our family. Well, if by telling her the truth I can get her released, I think that's a good enough reason to put an end to this charade.
Are you telling this jury that your mother knew for a certainty that when your sister was under 13 years of age, she was about to, or indeed actually was, indulging in sexual intercourse?
I am.
But how could your mother be so certain?
Because my father had already been having sex with her for over a year.
You may continue, Mr. Griffiths.
Thank you, my lord. Now, you are telling my lord and the jury that your father indulged in an incestuous relationship with your young sister from the time she was 12 years of age.
I am. Of course, I'm referring to the first time they actually had sex. For several years prior to that, you'd been doing everything you can short of actual sexual intercourse.
These are very serious allegations you're making. How can you be absolutely certain that what you're telling this court is true?
I'm quite certain. I think it's about time the lies stopped, don't you? I think it's about time the Selsey family faced reality.
How can you be certain what you're telling us is the truth? I mean, if, for example, your sister told you these things, they could have been merely childish fantasies.
Because I was there, I was in that house. I was present when my mother first gave Jane contraceptive pills. I was there when he cuddled her, fondled her, kissed her. Damn it, I was there the first time he had sex with her.
You were there? You were in the house?
No, in the bed. He'd made love to me first.
He'd had intercourse with you as well?
Yes, that's what I said.
And all this would have been prior to you going off to university?
Yes, that's right. That's why my sister was being initiated to take over.
Was this the first time he'd had intercourse with you?
No, it was the last time. The first time? That was on my 12th birthday. I remember it very well. I got a brand new bicycle.
For your birthday?
No, because I'd been a good girl in bed with Daddy.
Are you telling this court that between the ages of 12 and 18, your father had an incestuous relationship with you?
I am.
Well, have you got any idea how many times this occurred over that period?
I've no idea of the exact number of times. I tried to work it out recently. Hundreds of times. It would happen several times a week.
If you don't mind me saying so, Miss Selsey, you do appear to be remarkably calm and detached about this extraordinary state of affairs.
Do I? Well, for me, they were not extraordinary. It's only when I went to university that they appeared to be unusual. It was only when I really began to relate to people of my own age that I realized that what I had accepted as normal from my early childhood was not the norm in other homes. You must understand, my father didn't suddenly attack me one day. He didn't suddenly whisk me off to bed and rape me. From my earliest childhood, he had cuddled and fondled me. What subsequently happened seemed at a time like a normal, logical extension of that kissing and cuddling. Mummy would give me a little sweet before I went to bed each night, and afterwards, Daddy would buy me big bags of real sweets. It was not the subject of major breakfast time discussions. It was all accepted as perfectly normal and proper. Daddy told me when I was very young, I can't remember exactly how old I was, but this was our special secret, something I must never tell anyone else about. He made me promise. I've kept that promise until now. I'm not condemning my father. I love him, but not in the way he loved me, of course, but I care for him. He didn't force me to do anything I didn't want to do. It all seemed so right. It made me feel very grown up when I was still a little girl to know that Daddy had desired me. I remember the day when I asked him if I was better in bed than Mum. And when he told me that I was, and that he hardly ever slept with Mummy, I was thrilled. No one ever told me it was wrong. Then, of course, no one knew what we were doing except Dad and Mum, and they were both quite happy about it. We'd always been a very close-knit family, and somehow what Daddy and I were doing made us all that much closer. When we all realized that I would be leaving home to go to university, it became obvious that he intended to replace me with Jane. And that seemed all right, too.
Does it seem all right now?
No, it doesn't. You must remember, however, I've had 5 years away from home. 5 years to find my feet and compare the standards of my environment with other people's standards.
Yes, now on the 8th of June, were you visiting your parents?
Yes, I was at home.
And were you there when he was stabbed 3 times?
No, I was in bed.
But we heard earlier that the whole family were gathered.
It's not true. I was in bed and my mother was in bed. My father and sister were still up watching television. There was no one else present when he was knifed.
Well, why did you all persist in this story of a family argument caused by Jane's late homecoming, and that you all witnessed the accidental stabbings?
Because our parents wanted us to. Because they didn't want the truth to come out. They didn't want a fuss, scandal with the neighbours. Neighbours? What was the neighbours? I sometimes feel my whole childhood was controlled long range by the neighbours.
And just because of that, you all agreed to tell a tissue of lies?
Don't moralise, Mr. Griffith. You must remember Jane and I were brought up to honour our father and mother.
So, this first story was concocted by the entire family to protect your father.
Yes, that's right.
Was that why the police were not contacted after the stabbing?
Yes. Mum felt sure that the hospital would get in touch with the police anyway, but at least it gave her a little time to try and calm Jane down.
If the police had appeared earlier, Jane would have probably blurted the whole thing out.
Yes, now by the whole thing, you mean the incestuous relationships that your father had been indulging in?
Yes. She was hysterical, screaming, totally out of control.
This was immediately after the stabbing?
That's right.
Whose idea was it to concoct the story that the police were told?
My mother. She organised everything.
Now, you've told my learned friend that between the ages of 12 and 18, your father regularly had sexual intercourse with you.
Yes.
Well, I realise this is something of an ordeal for you, but I feel I must ask you some personal questions.
It's not an ordeal, Mr. Hurst. It's a relief.
Yes, I can understand that. Now, during those years, between the ages of 12 and 18, did you have any boyfriends?
I had friends.
No, I mean, did you have any regular boyfriends in the accepted teenage sense?
No.
None at all?
No, no.
Was this from personal choice?
No, it's from my parents' choice.
Well, did you have sexual intercourse with anyone other than your father during this time?
Good Lord, no. If I had done, there'd have been hell to pay. Sex began and ended at home.
Did you always submit happily to your father's advances?
In the early years I did, but as I began to get older I did object from time to time. I gather even wives do that if they don't feel like it, don't they?
Yes, I gather they do.
Well, Mummy certainly objected. She'd rather take one of her dogs for a walk than go to bed. In fact, that's what she usually did when I went to bed with Dad.
I see. Were there ever any occasions when your father actually forced you?
Not force. Well, bribe, cajole, manipulated, but not forced.
Now, you told my learned friend that when it became obvious that you intended to leave home and go to university, it became clear that your father intended to replace you with Jane.
Yes.
Was there another of these Selsey family conferences we've heard so much about?
No, our family doesn't function like that. Things are only half said, hinted at. Jane just started getting the little presents, the extra attention.
Now, you said you were present when your mother first gave Jane contraceptive pills.
Yes. My mother has great difficulty in talking about things like the facts of life. She was having some trouble in convincing my sister that she should take the pill. Jane simply didn't understand the need. Mum called me in to explain. She was saying things to Jane like, it's good for you, it will help you. Jane thought it was some kind of medicine. I simply told her it was to make sure she didn't have babies.
Was anything said about your father during this conversation?
No, of course not. This sort of things were never said in our home.
Now, during your various visits home, after you'd begun your university course, did your father ever attempt to take you to bed again?
Initially he did. A hint or an oblique suggestion would be thrown out. But when I started locking my bedroom door and ignored things, he soon got the message.
So, on the night of the 8th of June, you were in bed when your father was stabbed?
Yes. I heard Jane screaming and I rushed downstairs. Mummy came out of her room and came down too. Dad was on the kitchen floor covered in blood and Jane was waving a knife around and screaming that she'd stabbed him.
Did she say anything else?
Nothing coherent. She was very hysterical.
You ever seen her in an hysterical condition before?
Not like that. She has a very excitable nature and inclines to the dramatic, but I'm sure she'll grow out of it.
Thank you, Miss Selsey. I have no further questions.
My lord?
Thank you, Mr. Griffiths. Now, as I understand it, this story of an argument between your parents and your sister about her coming home late is a fabrication.
Yes, my lord.
Now, has anything been subsequently said by any member of the family to indicate what exactly your father and sister were in fact arguing about that evening?
Not to me.
Thank you.
My lord, I feel under the circumstances I should recall Mr. Selsey to the witness box.
Do you have any objections to that course of action, Mr. Hurst?
Provided I have the right to further cross-examination, none, my lord.
Mr. Selsey. Mr. Selsey, will you step into the witness box, please?
I would remind you that you're still under oath, and I would advise you, Mr. Selsey, that I will not countenance any further perjury. Do you understand?
Yes, my lord.
I also advise you, Mr. Selsey, that you need not answer any questions which tend to incriminate you. Mr. Griffiths.
Thank you, my lord. Now, Mr. Selsey, you have been in court throughout your eldest daughter's evidence.
Yes, I've been here.
I beg your pardon.
Yes, I have been here.
And what she told my lord and the jury is the truth.
Yes, it is.
All of it.
Yes.
There is none of it which you wish to contradict.
No. None of it.
Mr. Selsey, you do realize what you're saying, don't you?
Yes.
Now, regarding the evening of the 8th of June, is it a fact that only you and the accused were present when you were stabbed?
Yes. The others were in bed.
What was the real reason for this argument between you and your youngest daughter?
Well, did you hear the question?
Yes, I heard it, my lord. I wanted Jane to go to bed with me. She refused.
No, Daddy, please don't.
Look, I warned you previously that any further disturbance would result in your being taken below. You've chosen to disregard that warning. Take her down.
My lord, surely under the circumstances, the evidence that's been given, the facts that have been laid before this court, is it not understandable that my client should show some distress?
Distress, yes, but not contempt.
Will you hear me further on this, my lord?
Certainly.
Clearly perjury has been committed in this trial. I'm particularly anxious that the accused hear all the evidence.
Well, yes, that is a valid point. Very well, she may remain, but I'll have no more outbursts.
I am deeply obliged, my lord. Just sit quietly.
You were telling the court that on the 8th of June, you wanted to go to bed with your daughter, and she refused. Now, please, continue.
An argument developed.
Well, did you hit her?
No.
Did you threaten her?
No. It was just an argument. What I said previously about her getting excited and waving a knife about is true. I was worried in case she might hurt herself. I grabbed for the knife, and she accidentally stabbed me.
You still insist it was an accidental stabbing?
Of course it was. She wouldn't deliberately hurt me. We love each other.
No further questions, my lord.
You love each other.
That's right.
But this was no normal love of a father for his daughter, was it?
It seemed normal to me.
You debauched your own flesh and blood, not one of your daughters, but both of them, not a single aberration, but time and time again, year after year. You call that normal? I put it to you that on that evening, you desired this young girl's body.
I've already told you. I wanted to take her to bed with me.
Yes, indeed you have, and for once she had the strength of character to refuse your obscene advances. For once you are not going to use this young girl, your own daughter, as a plaything. I put it to you that you threatened her, and you frightened her, and you used physical violence on her in an attempt to get her into your bed. Far from attacking you, she was defending herself, keeping you away with that knife, wasn't she?
I have never in my entire life used violence on either of my daughters.
Oh, really? I suppose having sex with your 12-year-old daughter was your idea of gentle behavior, was it? No further questions.
You may leave the witness box.
My lord, in the light of the evidence we have heard today, it may now be that Mrs. Selsey may be ready to give evidence.
Yes, that may be indeed the case.
You see, I've never been particularly interested in the physical side of marriage. In the earlier years, that put rather a strain on our relationship. James began to talk of a divorce. But as far as I was concerned, that was out of the question. It was unthinkable. I certainly was not prepared to countenance my husband taking a mistress. I was brought up to respect the sanctity of marriage. Standards are important to me. Also, there were the children to consider. I've seen what broken marriages can do to children. So, we made this alternative arrangement. It didn't do any harm. No one was hurt. And it kept the family together. I haven't come back into this witness box to justify what we did. I don't believe we have to justify it to anyone. It was our business, our affair. I don't know exactly what happened when James was accidentally stabbed. As Paul has already told you, we were in our bedrooms at the time. I also don't know why the family couldn't have been left alone to live our lives as we chose.
Mr. Hurst?
I have no further questions, my lord.
That, my lord, is the case for the prosecution.
Right, Mr. Hurst. What was the submission you wished?
My lord, I submit there is no case for answer. I do not believe the charge of wounding with intent would have been brought by the Crown if they had been in possession of these extraordinary facts prior to the trial.
Have you any observations to make, Mr. Griffiths?
Thank you, my lord. Whether the Crown would have proceeded with this charge if the facts had been known as a moot point, I don't know. It's a matter for your lordship.
Well, I believe the case should proceed and go to the jury.
As your lordship pleases. In view of the evidence we have heard, my lord, I request permission to have my client examined by a psychiatrist prior to calling evidence on her behalf.
Have you any objections to that, Mr. Griffiths?
Provided that my learned friend does not object to the same psychiatrist examining the elder daughter on my behalf. None, my lord. I'm sure that if we can mutually agree on a psychiatrist, it will serve to expedite matters.
Well, I'm certainly in favour of that. Now, will someone go and tell that poor jury that we've adjourned for the day?
All stand.
The case of the Queen against Selsey will be concluded tomorrow when the jury reaches its verdict in the Crown Court. The case you're about to see is a fictional one. The procedure, however, is legally accurate. The characters are played by actors, but the jury is selected from members of the public. Jane Selsey is accused of stabbing her father 3 times, causing him grievous bodily harm during a family quarrel. Yesterday, it was revealed in court that Mr. Selsey had been having an incestuous relationship with both his daughters for some time.
Dr. Rutherford, would you tell my lord and the jury your qualifications?
I am a Doctor of Medicine, a Master of Science, a Fellow of the Royal College of Physicians.
Yes, now did you...
A member of the Institute of Psychiatry with a diploma in psychiatry.
Thank you, Doctor. Did you yesterday afternoon, at the request of the defence, examine the accused, Jane Elizabeth Selsey?
Yes, I did. I'd like to say right away that any opinions that I express about the young woman must be qualified by the fact that this was my first examination of her.
Yes, of course, Doctor. What opinion, if any, did you form?
That she has a psychologically abnormal attachment to her father, occasioned largely, if not totally, by the fact that her father has participated with her in an incestuous relationship dating back to her early childhood.
I see.
And she also displays marked tendencies to an hysterical condition, which I would venture to suggest is a result of that incestuous relationship. In every other respect, she appeared to be perfectly healthy. Her intelligence quotient is well above average. She is a pleasant, lively young woman. However, her relationship with her father has seriously retarded her emotional growth.
Would she know the difference between right and wrong in the legal sense?
With the exception of her attitude towards the relationship with her father, most certainly.
Yes. What is her attitude towards this incestuous relationship?
Oh, she considers it perfectly proper and normal.
Doesn't that attitude surprise you?
Not at all, bearing in mind her environment. A home where her mother not merely condoned, but actively encouraged her to have an incestuous relationship with her father, and that incestuous relationship began long before her father actually had sexual intercourse with her. A home where her elder sister had also for many years been participating in a similar relationship. It would be extraordinary, bearing in mind all these circumstances, if she were to consider what she was doing anything other than proper and normal.
Well, is she, within the legal sense, sane?
Oh, yes, of course.
But you do believe this incestuous relationship has damaged her?
Oh, most certainly, and for the reasons I have already given.
Yes, now it's been said that incest is not the cause, but one symptom of a disrupted, disturbed family. You don't hold that view?
No, I certainly do not. While it's true that in the case of the Selsey family there was marital discord before there was incest, it doesn't necessarily follow that the family was disturbed or disrupted prior to the incestuous relationships. Every marriage has some discord at some time. That doesn't hold that they are disturbed or disrupted in the medical sense. I'm sure you would agree.
I wouldn't know. You clearly feel that Jane Selsey is disturbed.
Indeed I do, but I must make it quite clear that some of this disturbance is directly caused by this trial. How much, it is difficult to say after only one examination.
Do you mean if there be no trial, no arrest, no questioning by the police, she may well appear to all intents and purposes to be as normal as you or I?
Now, well, I haven't had the pleasure of examining you, Mr. Hurst, so I would hesitate to equate normality with your mental condition. As to my own normality, I would want to take a second opinion on that. It's possible my view might be rather subjective.
Yes. Well, let me put it this way, Doctor. If it had not been for this trial, is it possible that Jane may not have shown any psychological disturbance?
No, I don't think so. It might have been less dramatically obvious, but I'm sure it would have been manifest.
You're quite sure of that?
Oh, yes, quite sure. You must remember that this young woman has been subject to sexual advances for many years from the one man she has every right to trust, is supposed to trust. A reaction to such sexual advances can take many forms.
Could you tell my lord and the jury some of these forms?
Fear, shame, confusion. Reactions in later life can be total amorality or frigidity, insanity, alcoholism, suicide. There are so many forms of reaction.
Yes, you mentioned insanity in the list of possible reactions. Now, do you have any personal case histories of such a reaction?
Indeed I do. I'm not, of course, at liberty in this courtroom to quote from specific cases that I have dealt with. Perhaps it'll suffice to quote the well-known example of Virginia Woolf. From the age of 6, she was sexually molested by an adult half-brother. In adulthood, Virginia Woolf was frigid and was also subject to bouts of madness.
What's your own professional view of incest?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer.
I'd be obliged if you'd try.
Oh, no, please don't misunderstand me, Mr. Hurst. I'm not being reluctant. It's just that the subject is very complex. There is no quick one-line response, or at least for me there is not. On the one hand, some cases that I have dealt with have made me feel that incest was akin to baby battering.
Baby battering?
As the lay public would call it. On the other hand, I have sometimes been deeply saddened that there is in our society an incest taboo. Our society is deeply ignorant of the subject. Indeed, my own profession is equally ill-informed. To my own knowledge, no thorough classification of incest behaviour has ever been attempted. And I know of only one large-scale study of the incest taboo, and that was based on a grossly inaccurate premise.
Yes, well, if we might
and what was that inaccurate premise, Doctor?
That throughout the world, in every society, incest is taboo and is a grossly deviant act.
That is not the case?
It most certainly is not.
Well, can you give me an example of a society that accepts incest?
The Japanese, for example. In Japan, incest is not a crime. Research indicates that it is widely practiced in that country.
So fortunately, we're not in Japan. Now, has your own work shown any particular tendencies or trends?
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
Well, have you, for example, found that incest is more likely to occur in overcrowded, working-class environments?
I have found that there is no norm for this so-called abnormality. It occurs in slums, it occurs in the stockbroker belt. It cuts right through race, colour, creed...
Yes, no single explanation.
No, there is not.
Now, if we might return to this example that brings you to this court, Jane Selsey. Now, did you find evidence from your examination of her that prior to the incident on June the 8th, she'd begun to rebel, to protest the situation? Now, I understand young girls do assert their own values at this age.
Indeed, they often do, and yes, I think that element is present in Jane. She's a growing woman. It would be very natural that under the influence of external factors, friends, her own peer group, that she would begin to assert her own individuality.
Now, her father has testified that on the night in question, he wanted to take her to bed, she resisted, and an argument developed.
Yes, so I understand. Unfortunately, Jane showed great confusion about the actual circumstances. She also showed great guilt.
Guilt because she committed incest with her father?
No. Guilt because she had been responsible, unwittingly, for this incest becoming public knowledge. She is very fearful of the consequences for her father.
She still cares about his welfare?
She loves him.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rutherford. No further questions. Well,
Now, Doctor, this teenage rebellion against an incestuous relationship, does it always take the form of plunging a knife into one's father?
No, of course not.
And would you agree that most girls who are subject to an incestuous relationship eventually assert their own values quite peacefully?
Yes, I would agree with that.
And I would put it to you that most cases of incest that come to our courts are merely the tip of the iceberg.
Absolutely. About 300 cases a year become known to the police. Of that, about 150 result in actual prosecutions. But these figures do not accurately reflect the real level of incest in this country.
What would your own estimation be?
Well, as I've already indicated, it's a largely unresearched subject. But if I was forced to make an educated guess based upon my own research and that of my colleagues, I would put a figure of 50,000 on it.
What, 50,000 incestuous relationships at any one time?
Yes, my lord, and that is a conservative estimate.
Why, in your view, do so few end up in criminal proceedings?
Many, because they're simply not known officially, and many because social workers, psychiatrists, other professionals do not report them to the police.
Thank you. Mr. Griffiths?
Now, clearly, many of these relationships are quite happily resolved.
Yes, they are.
And the relationship between Paula Selsey and her father, is that happily resolved?
I believe it's well on the way. At least as far as Paula is concerned. I haven't had the opportunity of examining her father.
Yes, indeed. But yesterday, at the request of the Crown, you did examine Paula.
Yes, I did.
And what were your conclusions?
Well, one, as I've just indicated, is that she appears to be adjusting remarkably well.
No permanent damage?
One can never be sure, but I don't think so. Of course, she may experience problems in later life in her relationships with other men. Only time will tell. Like her sister, she does not regard that what happened between herself and her father was abnormal. And like her sister, having regard to her environment, that is to be expected. She is totally free of the incest taboo.
Yes, now this argument that occurred between the accused and her father, which culminated in the stabbing, my learned friend has suggested to you that this was caused because she was trying to find her own sexual identity. She was rebelling against the continuation of the incestuous relationship. Now, it did seem to me, Doctor, you were rather guarded in accepting that view.
Only Jane really knows why her father ended up with 3 stab wounds. Because of her confusion on this aspect, I am very reluctant to be more specific.
You would prefer not to draw conclusions?
That is so.
Yes, and I put it to you that the relationship between the father and the accused is not really the sort that normally comes to our courts.
I would agree with that entirely. There is no history of violence, no history of parental brutality, certainly not in the physical sense.
Dr. Rutherford, thank you.
My lord?
Thank you, Mr. Hurst. Doctor, I've listened with great interest to your evidence, which I found highly illuminating. Now, you mentioned that the accused showed great confusion when discussing the actual incident which has caused her to be in the dock today.
That is so, my lord.
Now, would you say that confusion was caused by the fact that she couldn't tell you exactly what had happened, or that she wouldn't tell you exactly what had happened?
My lord, I would very much like to know the answer to that question myself.
Now, Jane, you understand that you're on oath.
Yes, I understand.
Now, my lord and the jury only want to hear the truth. You mustn't lie to protect your parents or anyone. Now, is that clear?
Yes, not much point in lying now, is there?
Precisely. Now, you've heard your sister testify that when you were 12 years of age, your father took you to bed and had sexual intercourse with you. Is that true?
Yes, that's true. Paula was in the same bed.
Now, did you on that occasion see him have sex with your sister?
Yes, I did.
Now, we've heard that prior to that incident, your mother started to give you contraceptive pills.
Yes. As Paula's already said, I didn't understand why I needed to take them. Mummy called Paula in and she explained to me.
Prior to the time that your father first took you to bed, had he previously assaulted you in any way?
Assaulted me?
Sexually assaulted you?
Look, you must understand. I don't regard the things we did as assaults and sexual intercourse. We made love.
Yes, I see. Well, prior to the first time you fully made love, your sister has testified that he'd been doing everything with you short of sexual intercourse. Now, is that true?
Yes, it is.
Can you recall how old you were when all this began?
No, I'm sorry, I can't. I can't remember a time when we didn't do things.
Things? What things?
Well, he would stroke me or caress me. That sort of thing.
Can you recall your feelings on the first occasion when your father fully made love to you?
I was very pleased. I knew it meant I was grown up.
That you were grown up?
Yes, that I'd be taking over from Paula. That I would be Daddy's best friend.
His best friend? Is that what he called you?
After I'd taken over from Paula, yes.
You are just 17 years of age.
Yes.
For the last 5 years, your father has been making love to you.
Well, for 5 years we've been doing it properly. But as I said, I can't remember a time when we didn't do things.
Do you have any boyfriends of your own age?
No. I'd like to, but Dad doesn't approve.
Well, have you talked to him about letting you go out with boys?
Oh, yes, dozens of times.
Yes, well, what was his reason for objecting?
He said I was too young.
He said you were too young?
That's right. Said that young boys couldn't be trusted, that I should wait until I was older.
But you are 17 years of age.
That's what I told Daddy, but it didn't make any difference.
Did you discuss this particular problem with your mother?
Yes, I did.
What was her view?
Daddy was right. She said I had all my life in front of me, that I could easily ruin it by going out with the wrong boy and getting involved. I told her I didn't want to get involved, just to go to dances and things like that.
Yes, now what did you take her to mean by getting involved?
Sleeping with boys, making love to them. Silly, really, because I only wanted to do that with Dad anyway.
Did you tell her that?
I tried to, but she wouldn't listen. She got rather upset when I mentioned Dad and stopped me saying any more.
Was your mother ever there when your father took you to bed?
You mean in the room?
Yes.
Good Lord, no.
Well, was she ever in the house?
Oh, yes. She'd be busy doing something or asleep in her own room. Other times she'd be out walking her dogs.
Now, when the police questioned you, Detective Inspector Wilkins testified that you said, "Why don't you leave us alone? This is a family matter." Did you say that?
Something like
Had you
that,
been
yes.
previously told to say that by anyone?
You mean Mummy?
Or anyone?
No, whatever I said I personally
Yes,
felt.
But the statement that you made to the police about the argument about coming in late and all the rest of it, that wasn't what you personally felt, was it?
No.
So why did you tell that story to the police?
It was agreed upon before Dad
Who
went to the hospital.
suggested it?
My parents. Mainly my mother.
Mainly your mother. Did your parents tell you why they wanted you to lie?
Mummy kept going on about the scandal and what the neighbours
Yes,
would
was
say.
she referring to the fact that your father had been stabbed or to the relationship you had with your father?
Both. Mainly Dad and me.
So, because of your parents, you lied to the police.
Yes.
You lied to the magistrate's court.
Yes.
To protect your father.
To protect all the family. Although it didn't make any sense to me.
What do you mean?
Well, both Mum and Dad were so anxious that what Daddy and I do wasn't made public. But all my life they both approved of what we were doing. It confused me.
Yes, I'm sure it did. So, on the night your father was stabbed, you and he were alone at the time?
Yes. The others had gone to bed. We were watching television.
I got into the kitchen to make some supper when Dad and I began to have an argument.
Now, your father has previously testified that the argument occurred because he wanted to take you to bed and you refused. Is that right?
That wasn't what started the argument.
What did?
Paula.
But I thought you said you and your father were alone.
We were. He began talking about Paula, saying how proud he was of her. It was the same every time she came home for a visit. All I heard was, Paula's such a fine young woman, Paula's such a bright, intelligent girl. It didn't seem fair.
Why not?
Because I'd taken over. I was supposed to be his best friend. The way he fussed over her when she was there, you'd have thought they were still having a love affair.
And were they?
They certainly were not. I'm his girlfriend. I'm the special one.
So, on the evening of June the 8th, the argument with your father was provoked by his attitude towards your sister.
Yes. I told him I resented all the attention he was giving her.
Were you jealous of your sister?
Yes, I was. I didn't see why she should come home whenever she felt like it and get all the attention. It wasn't fair.
Did you tell him that on that particular evening?
Yes, I did. I'd gone into the kitchen, and he made some remark about how proud he was of Paula. It was the last straw. I felt very hurt. I told him he was being very cruel to me, that he didn't love me. He said I was being silly, that no one could replace me, not even Paula. I thought he was just saying it to calm me down, and it made me even angrier. He called me a foolish little girl and said something about it being time I grew up. I told him if I was grown up enough to sleep with him, I was grown up. He put his arm around me and suggested we should go to bed.
Together?
Of course. But by now, I was so angry that I said no, I wouldn't. I'd never said no before. I remember I was waving a knife around. There were more words, but I can't remember what was said. Then he was lying on the floor, covered in blood, and I was screaming.
Jane, did you deliberately stab your father 3 times? Jane?
I honestly don't know.
Thank you, Jane. No further questions.
I have no questions for this witness.
I have no questions. Mr. Hurst?
That, my lord, is the case for the defense.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we have heard much in this courtroom of the crime of incest, and that act is a crime and has been in this land since 1908. You also heard how the doctor estimated that at any one time there were at least 50,000 such relationships in this land. Incest is as old as man. Indeed, if we are to believe the Bible, how after the flood did Noah's family people the earth? But by incest. Certainly, again in the Bible, the children of Adam must have indulged in incestuous relationships. Certainly Lot did with both his daughters. At one time, Egyptian royalty were compelled to marry close relations. Byron, Wordsworth, Bramwell, Bronte, and Beardsley all allegedly indulged in incestuous relationships. But I don't recall any one of them receiving 3 stab wounds in the chest. Now, I put it to you, incest as a contributing factor in this case is not relevant. Plainly, the accused did stab her father 3 times. And the Crown submits to you that that attack was intentional. And I ask you to find the accused, Jane Selsey, guilty as charged.
But I say to you that you cannot rule out incest as a contributing factor in this case. This young girl has been sexually abused and criminally assaulted virtually since infancy. My learned friend referred to the Bible. Let me do the same. In the early Christian church, incest was a crime in a class of its own, beyond adultery and murder. St. Paul performed the first known excommunication from the Christian church when he discovered one of the Corinthians had indulged in incest. In the Old Testament, there are clear instructions forbidding incest. My learned friend has cited literary figures who may have indulged in incest. Significantly, he did not cite Sophocles' Oedipus Rex, where the realization that they had indulged in incest caused the mother to commit suicide and the son to gouge his eyes out. Liberal bodies have argued for the abolition of incest as a crime. One of the arguments was it's difficult in reality to harm oneself by having too much sex. Now, doubtless, the National Council for Civil Liberties, the people who made that absurd remark, knew nothing of venereal disease, the pregnancies, the horrific long-term psychological damage that a victim of incest so frequently suffers. We do not know how Jane has been affected. Sane she may be, normal she is not. How can anyone seriously argue that a young girl growing up in a household as corrupt as the Selseys ever had real choice? Clearly, on that particular night, her father wanted to take her to bed. And clearly, on that particular night, for the first time, she resisted that suggestion. I put it to you that this young girl, perhaps without realizing it, was, for the first time, defending her honor. I ask you to find her not guilty.
You have therefore three possible verdicts: that the accused is not guilty of wounding with intent to cause bodily harm, but is guilty of wounding without that intent. Secondly, that she is not guilty. And finally, that the accused is guilty as charged. Now, will you please retire, elect a foreman to speak for you, and consider your verdict.
Members of the jury, will your foreman please stand? Just answer the question, yes or no. Have you reached a verdict upon which you are all agreed?
Yes.
Do you find the defendant, Jane Selsey, guilty or not guilty of wounding with intent to commit grievous bodily harm?
Not guilty of wounding with intent, but guilty of unlawful wounding.
Mr. Hurst, will you take my assurance that a speech in mitigation is not necessary?
As your lordship pleases.
I propose to give you a conditional discharge, Miss Selsey, but I intend to make an order so that you will receive such medical attention as is advised. Now, do you undertake to comply with that order?
Yes, my lord.
Very well. Conditional discharge, you may leave the court.
Does that mean I'm not going to prison?
Yes, you may leave the court. Inspector Wilkins, you no doubt have a duty to perform towards Mr. and Mrs. Selsey.
All stand.